Welcome, everyone. People here in Federal Way in Tacoma, and as well as our pastors in Sierra Leone who are uh, joining in to dig a little deeper into the text of 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 1 through 16 today. So, yesterday, Sunday, we got to discuss this passage. In our digital liturgy on the Sunday morning, and there are elements of things that I got to learn in preparation for that message that didn't make the cut to be in the message, and some of it is things that are a little deeper that weren't the right thing to mention no, during Sunday. And so for those that wanted to go a little deeper, look at the passage again, that's what this video is about. Just a quick kind of deep dive. So first, I wanted to talk a little bit about Greek and the Greek language. I don't refer to Greek often when I'm teaching a message for the whole church. They're often interesting insights that you can discover with the Greek, but almost always I've found that they only reinforce what you could understand from the English translation. So it's it. So that's one reason I don't often mention the Greek. It's like an extra level, but something we can talk about a little bit today. Also, I want to be careful to not imply that to understand the Bible you have to be a Greek scholar. And we want everyone to read the Bible and to bring questions to community, and not assume that the pastor or leader is the only person who can read the Bible and understand what it means. And I think that if we talk about Greek a lot as we're teaching the church, then it creates that expectation or that kind of self-deprecating view that, like, oh, I can't really understand. I haven't studied Greek. I shouldn't read the Bible. I'll just wait for somebody to tell me about it. And the fact that we have it and we want to encourage people to read it. I don't want a message on Sunday to undermine that in any way. Also, I'm not a Greek scholar. And so I know there's a lot I don't know about Greek, and so I know I can get into situations where I could come to conclusions that are not true because I don't understand Greek as well. And just to give you a little personal history, I went to a secular university and had the opportunity to study Greek there for four semesters. I got to study Greek, and so I studied Attic Greek, the classical Greek that the kind of many stories and things are written in that predate the Bible. And then one of those semesters we dove into Koine Greek, the Greek of the Bible. And there were a couple other Ionic, dialects that we covered during that class. I had a really great professor who I also took a Greco-Roman history course from, and she was super fun. She was super knowledgeable. One of the, definitely the best Greek scholar I've ever personally interacted with, and I even as a teacher later had her come and do something for a middle school class that I was teaching, talking about Greek and Greek culture and ancient Greek culture and stuff like that. So I had this really great opportunity to learn, but it's been many years ago, and I don't remember a lot of that study. But one of the things I remember as I was in it doing this Greek study is that when often, almost every time, I heard an American pastor mention Greek in a sermon, I thought he was wrong about the conclusion that he came to when I was in the midst of studying. And sometimes I would bring that back and ask my professor about it, and and she would agree that like he's come to an incomplete or kind of erroneous conclusion based on whatever he looked up. And often we look at, especially if you're not a Greek scholar, you look up a word in the dictionary and you see it has a root word, and you assume that connection is really strong. But you can just think about the English word butterfly. If you looked up, oh, butterfly means, well, there's the word butter in there, and there's the word fly. Fly, I get, it flies around, but butter, you could invent some connection with the root word butter that is just wrong, is just or is unknowable. The word butterfly in English is too old for anyone to reliably know what its etymology is, why, and if there's any connection to the word butter. It might be that they're two sounds that ended up being similar and due to different origins, and the word butter, the stuff we put on toast, and the word butter and butterfly come from different origins, but we don't know that. And so you can imagine that people studying, like looking up Greek and not really understanding the culture and being, scholars in that right, could make some poor conclusions. So living overseas for a while, heard this joke, like if you know 3 languages, you're trilingual. If you know 2 languages, you're bilingual. If you only know 1 language, you're American. So there's some truth to that. Most Americans don't know another language than English, and so it's easy to take cultural ideas from English, or misapply our understanding of language to another language. So, and Greek and Latin are both pretty complicated languages that have voices and declinations and conjugations and things that we don't have in English, and so it's hard to it's hard to make one-to-one comparisons often. So all that to say, please exercise some caution if you're looking at Greek when you're studying. And I'm especially skeptical of anybody who's teaching who says that the ESV or the NIV has a mistranslation in it. If someone's willing to say that, they're essentially saying that they're a better Greek scholar than all the teams of people that got together to produce that. And the actual scholars who have criticisms with various parts or nuances of how things should be translated, are even they're unlikely to bring that kind of harsh level of condemnation on a biblical translation like the NIV or the ESV. And so be skeptical and trust the experts. For instance, during this study, I read some of this book by Gordon Fee. Sorry, it's a little blurry there. And it's the first epistle to the Corinthians, his commentary. And Gordon Fee is a professor at Regents in Vancouver, not too far from here, and is a very respected New Testament scholar and Greek scholar. And he also wrote a book called How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth, which is a great resource for anybody to understand how to read the Bible, different approaches to take to reading the Bible that have nothing to do with the deep kind of academic scholarship that he's known for. So he's a practical theologian as well as a academician. And so there's one passage that I wanted to read for us from his book here. And he says, and he's talking about the very first part of this chapter, the first paragraph of chapter 4, where Paul is saying, regard us as servants of Christ. He says, what is especially significant for this paragraph is the change of metaphors. In the preceding argument, chapter 3, verses 5 to 9, the word diakonai was used, emphasizing the servant nature of their task under God. The word diakonai here is the word we transliterate into deacon, which the word means servant in Greek, and it's the word that we also have used in English as deacon for that servant office in the church. And so to pick up again, emphasizing the servant nature of their task under God with secondary emphasis on the division of labor. Now the metaphor changes to that of a household. The first word, hyperitas, servants of Christ, is a more general term, but often refers to one who has the duties of administering the affairs of another. That this was Paul's intent is verified by the second word, oikonomos, which denotes a steward, often a slave, who has been entrusted with managing a household. Thus, the present imagery is altogether that of a Greco-Roman household. It turns out, in fact, to be a happy change of metaphors for Paul. Not only is it pregnant with the notion of accountability that is in the forefront of this paragraph, but it inherently conveys the motif of delegated authority as well. The other concern of this conclusion to his now long argument, which began with their contentions as to who belongs to whom, that's back in chapter 1, where they were saying, I belong to Paul, I belong to Apollos. Thus, apostles are to be regarded as servants of Christ, re-emphasizing their humble position and their belonging to Christ alone. At the same time, they're stewards of God's mysteries, emphasizing both their trusted position and their accountability to God. So there are three Greek words that are all that can all be translated servant here when oikonomos is used, and it's often translated steward. The NIV basically uses the word servant, doesn't use it twice, but just uses the word servant there. And so it's kind of lumping those two together in a sense. So three words for the word that's translated servant in English often that have different kind of slight differences in implication or connotation. So the diakonos is the word often used for like someone who's waiting tables, and we see that in Acts chapter 6, where the 7 are chosen to care for the widows in the first church. The word they are servants. They're not called deacons in the sense of an office, but we've connected those in a lot of ways because they're doing the servant work, and we see that word used pretty broadly throughout the New Testament. It's the term for a servant. There's another Greek word, which is actually one of the first Greek words I learned in school, and it's doulos, and that is slave. So sometimes Paul refers to himself with the word doulos, and it's almost always translated servant when Paul uses it to refer to himself. But the word literally is slave, and it's not incorrect. The word can include slave and servant similar to the way we might say that in English in some ways. Um, and so, like an indentured servant is in some ways a slave. They're without choice. And and so the word hyperitas then is kind of more like the word assistant, or it it implies that there's authority given, and this servant can act on behalf of the master, um, just like an assistant might book a plane ticket or send an email on behalf of the person they're working for. There's this sense of accountability and delegated authority that's implied in that word, which Gordon Fee here is saying that fits with the argument Paul's trying to make. That's why he switches the word. Um, and then lastly, there's oikonomos, which is, I think, a really interesting word. It's connected to the word oikos, which means household in Greek, and the New Testament time has this this Greco-Roman period has this bigger view of a household than we might in our time and place. So you have the biological family in this Greco-Roman household, but you also have, and this would be, a wealthier household, which, think of an estate with servants and multiple people that are involved in managing the affairs of the household. You might have people who work outside, you might people who work inside, you might have people with various responsibilities for in the kitchen or in other places, personal attendance. So all of those people, more than just 3 or 4, would be the household, and that might include extended family as well. You might have parents and adult children and their spouses and their children all living together in a large household. And so when we see the word household in the Bible, often that's what is intended. That was the common understanding at the time. And oikonomos is a household manager, like a steward, someone who is like, maybe at the top of the servants, overseeing the other servants. And that's the role that Paul is attributing to himself, saying, Corinthians, you should regard us, Paul and Apollos, as these household managers of the household of God, given that authority by the master, God, to help run the affairs of the church. And so that understanding, knowing that the word oikonomos is connected to oikos, helps us kind of see that connection to a steward and this household language, which we see all throughout Paul's epistles. And so, like I was saying before, that the Greek that we just talked about is not essential to understand the point that Paul's making, but it helps us make some connections, some interesting connections, and see that the argument has even maybe a little more weight than we thought otherwise. So it's not a brand new revelation from looking at the Greek. It's just kind of strengthening the argument and our understanding of the text. And I want to come back to oikonomos, but there's one other thing I wanted to mention that I thought was interesting. In verse 3, Paul is saying that he it's a very small thing that he's judged by you, the Corinthians, or any human court, and the and literally the word court is the word day in Greek, and it's kind of like in English we have the expression he's going to have his day in court, and so the word day, so it says human day and it's translated human court. That was a saying, or it's clearly understood that he's talking about a court. But interestingly, the word is day, which then gives us a link back to chapter 3 when where he said that there's a day coming, the day when Jesus will judge the work that has been built on top of his foundation. Is it built in gold and silver and precious stones, or is it built with wood and hay and straw? The precious materials are going to survive a fire, but the other flammable materials won't. And that final judgment is what Paul is referring to here. We see that in the text clearly in English, but seeing the word day there and the word day above is just kind of an extra little connection that was kind of cool to see. And briefly, one last note on the word oikonomos or oikos. In Ephesians chapter 3, Paul says, I won't read it right now, but he says that he's been given this job, this stewardship of the mysteries of God. Mystery, when Paul uses the word mystery, he almost always means something that was hidden in the past and now is revealed because of Jesus. And when he says, I've been given this job, and there are a bunch of there's a lot of text in this little passage, and so he talks about a few other things before he describes what the job is. So he starts by saying, I've been given this job, talks about a few other related things, and then he describes what his job is. And he said, one is to preach to the Gentiles, and two is to reveal the plan for this mystery of the church being this Jew-Gentile combined church. The word plan is also connected to the word oikos, and it's the word that we get the English word economy from. It's oikonomia. And so he's saying he's a steward of the household of God, and the administration or the plan or the household order of things is what he's been tasked to communicate to the church. And so when we look at Paul's instructions to the church, we see that he is the steward in the household entrusted to lay out the plan, to bring to light the plan, the administration, the oikonomia of how things are supposed to work in God's household. Sometimes you'll hear people say, in God's economy, things work like this. And I think that's where we get that phrase in English, God's economy, is oikonomia, the plan that Paul was entrusted to deliver to the church. And so as we talked about that in our Acts class recently, as we were looking at that, that when we look at the book of Acts, it's not only a description of what the church did, but it's laying out the general approach that the church should always have toward itself and to its leaders and to those that are in our cities. And so the church is to be this joyful, bold, spirit-empowered, gospel-centered group of people who love one another and serve their city and are unstoppable because the Spirit is the one behind the work that they're doing. And so that we see that in the book of Acts. We see the apostles taking the Great Commission and understanding that to mean planting and establishing churches. And so that's our work. That's what we get to do. And as we regard one another and our leaders as servants, I think it leads to unity, gratitude, humility, and freedom from being bound to the approval of others. And so just as the Father sent Jesus, so Jesus sends us to make disciples of him, the servant king. And that's what we get to be all about. So thanks for listening in to a little peek under the hood of my preparation for the message this past week, and I hope those of you that got to watch this were blessed by that. So thanks.